Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. Had a really cool conversation with a new friend of ours, Danny Dreyer, who you met through the Wellbeing Center, which is where we'll be in a few weeks, or actually we'll be there when this airs. Danny was cool, man. He talks about mindfulness and embodiment of spiritual practices through physical activities and how to be more grounding while you are in a physical reality state.
Yeah, Danny Dreyer is the co-founder of ChiRunning, Chi Walking, and Chi Living. And he melded his experience in Tai Chi to running and walking, and it's pretty awesome and inspiring.
Yeah, I like how he kind of married those two practices, and he realized that, the spiritual philosophies between Tai Chi and how to bring that into the physical world also had parallels in the emotional and, mental and spiritual states of being. So he has a lot of wisdom, has a lot of experience. He sounds like he's did ChiRunning for 20 years, and then, he's retired now, but has tons of experience. And I really enjoyed hearing his stories.
Yeah, he uses that as a spiritual practice in life too, which I loved. So enjoy our conversation with Danny Dreyer.
Please do.
Hello, Danny. Welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Corinne. Glad to be here.
Great. Thank you for agreeing to be on. So we're going to dive right into the question. Many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to, question their so-called reality. So do you remember when you became a seeker?
I actually do. And I was probably 17 or so, something like that. And it's so funny because I had grown up, just raised by my mother, but she was a Southern Baptist. And so after studying the Southern Baptist for many years, that's what led me to being a spiritual seeker, because I wasn't going to find it there. And but my mother's sister, I have an aunt that was reading a set of books that she said, now these are really fascinating. You should read these books. And she just kind of told me the name of the books. I ordered them and got them. But it was a set of books called The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East. This is before I knew anything about meditation, about anything. And I read 5 books. I just buried myself in these books. They were incredible. And so that's what started me on, okay, there really is something to this, that there's an alternative way to, I didn't even know what I was seeking back then, but I knew that what I was being taught about religion and stuff like that was just nowhere. But this, and I will say that, growing up as a kid, my 2 biggest heroes of all time, were Superman and Jesus. So Superman had the physical world totally down, didn't matter. He could fly, he could, whatever he needed to do, he had it. And Jesus had the heart, he had everything else down. He totally, I admired him as a person. And even at the age of 10 or 12, I could see what a mess Christianity had made of Jesus, And so I just wasn't believing that he was this, whatever they were putting him up to be. Like I said, well, the guy was really evolved, really with it, and, not a God unto himself. I just never believed that story. And I said, he had to be a human being. He was walking around like you and me. He just happened to have his shit together, And so I had that from a pretty early age. But then when I read these books, it was amazing, because these guys, I don't know if you know about the books, but they are fascinating, a fascinating read by a bunch of researchers that traveled to the Far East and followed the paths of Buddha and Jesus and all these people. And they found all this evidence that they were around, and actually in certain circumstances got to speak with them, which was fascinating to me. And so it just totally turned me on to wow, there is something really different going on. And I was always fascinated by the invisible world. There was something about it that was like, there's got to be something more than what I'm touching and seeing and feeling. I felt this undercurrent that I didn't have an explanation for, but that kind of led me into seeking what this whole alternative reality was really about, what the invisible world was about. And that led to, once I finished those books, then when I was 19 or 20, that's when TM came over. And so I started off learning how to meditate through TM. And, the rest is kind of, I would say the rest is history, but the rest is like just this totally wild ride. It's not just history. It's like one thing after another led to one thing after another. And, so now I don't know, it's been 50 years since I, started meditating, and it's still never a dull moment, So, but I think that thing, when that set of books, when I really understood that there really is something to all these feelings that I've got, and people have experienced this invisible world and energy on other levels and life on other levels. That's when I said, okay, I'm in,
Well, that's interesting that you separate the teacher from, the religion, from the dogma, and with
Yeah.
Christ. That's a great way to put it, because I've had a very similar upbringing, or at least the tension of realizing something doesn't add up here. That was my
that was the main phrase going through my head. Something doesn't add up here,
and that's what I've had to come back to, is there is the core of the teachings of Christ and Jesus are as pure as a lot of other faiths, a lot of other religions. That the core values are really synonymous with each other. And so it's when you can separate the teacher and the teaching from the rest of it. It's funny that you had your two superheroes, growing up, and that's a great foundation to have going into what sounds like a wild ride. So what transpired after you learned to meditate then?
Well, it was interesting. So then, so I did do TM for, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years. And I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. And so there was a lot of spiritual teachers that came through Boulder. And the Naropa Institute started there, and all these major dudes would be cruising through. And every now and then, so I went to lectures by Satchidananda and Muktananda and all these old yogis that came over from India. And I ended up actually finding an Indian teacher, a guy who came from India and married a woman from Boulder. And so he moved back here, and he was a meditation teacher. And he was pretty awake. And I was really fortunate. One thing I will say, in terms of all the turning points in my life, is that I have been incredibly blessed with having had some just amazing teachers fall into my life. I don't know how, I don't know if I did it, who did it, however it happened. Man, it's like I can't even believe it. I've just had some really, really good teachers. Anyway, this guy from India was he was a tantric yogi, and but very steeped in the Hindu tradition as well. And so he took me into all kinds of other levels of meditation. And he was not just meditation, but past life regressions and all kinds of stuff that he would do with me that he didn't really do with his other students for some reason. He said, I think you're ready for some stuff, and so I'm going to show you some things. And so I worked with him one-on-one a lot, which was really helpful. And he helped to guide me through a lot of different states and levels and things like that. I hung out with him for quite a few years, and eventually I traveled to India, because he was going back home to India to take a group of his local students on a tour of the spiritual sites of India. And so I was already on a path of really wanting to explore the world. And it just so happened at that time, Pan Am, the airlines back then, it's not no longer around, but they had this deal, a promotional deal that said, they called it Around the World in 80 Days. And you bought the ticket for one price. You get on and off the plane as many times as you want, as long as you kept going in one direction. And the ticket was good for 80 days. So I did that, and I, with my goal of going to India. And I spent the bulk of my time in India and Nepal, and the rest of the time was just little hops, stops in other places, but not a whole lot of stops. And so I did go to his home village, and I saw where he grew up and how his whole spiritual background evolved. And I got to visit the place in India, Bodh Gaya, where Buddha set up the Nalanda Institute, and I got to look through that. So I toured all these spiritual sites with a spiritual teacher from India, and it was like, whoa, this is off the charts for me. I loved it, and but I was just really diving into it full force, and so. And then, it was interesting. What happened after that was that, so I went on this trip around the world. I ended up going to Nepal, and I split off from him. I ran into him in India, hung out with him for, a couple of weeks. And then my trip continued on. I went on to go to Nepal, and I did a trek once just by myself, and went up into the Annapurna sanctuary. And there was a turning point that happened to me right there, where I was about as far away from Boulder as you can get. I was exactly on the opposite side of the world. I was, and I couldn't have gotten any further from home. And I climbed up the side of this mountain one day to get a view of Annapurna, because I was down in this valley. It was so deep you couldn't see out. So I climbed this mountain so I could look over at this huge peak, and the moon was up above that peak. And I realized that, all of my friends back in Boulder were looking at the same moon. It was, I don't know, it sounds simple, but when I had this realization of like how small the universe really is, relatively speaking, and here I felt like I was a million miles away, but at the same time, I felt like there was no distance between me and what was happening on the other side of the world, or happening on my side of the world, or it was very much just all in the moment. Everything just happens now. And that was a pretty big moment for me to realize that as far away as from home as I could be, I was never further away from myself than I never left, I never left myself, but everything in my life was with me. You know what I mean? My whole life fell into this view of kind of like, when you start developing an observer and you just can kind of zoom out, that's what it felt like a big zoom out. and that was really the start of a felt sense of being in a different world. Before it was more intellectual. I would read books. It was fascinating. I was enthralled with it and stuff. But to have a feeling in my body of another reality was really special. And that hung with me for quite a while and helped guide me to other things. And so, I came back from this trip around the world, and I was like, I had quit my job. I didn't have anywhere to be, nowhere to go, no money, and so I had to get work. So I eventually got back into my own kind of spiritual path, but I wasn't with that Indian teacher anymore. I had I don't know why, I just felt like it's time to move on. That was really good, but it was time to move on. And then I did meet another spiritual teacher pretty soon after I got back from Boulder. So it's been this like string. And I met him. When I left that community, I ended up moving to San Rafael, California, where, I mean, there were so many spiritual teachers around here. Adya was out there, and all these, all kinds of other people were doing workshops around me and everything else. But what was going on for me at that point was I ended up spending 17 years in a spiritual community, this one in Boulder. And it was all, it was interesting because I'd been around a lot of spiritual groups, and the language of the groups always, it started to bother me because it was all airy fairy and all is love and blah, 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 you know, it was like nonsensical to me. I wasn't feeling it. It didn't make sense. I could tell, you know, it wasn't hitting me on a grounded level, you know, in my body. It was more cerebral. And so this teacher that I happened to find, really, he anchored all of the spiritual practice in the body. And so one of the things that he used in the body was running. And so I started, he encouraged a lot of the people around him to, his students to run. But what he was into doing was using running as a spiritual practice. Okay, so what happens is if you run far enough, all of your boundaries break down. You run far enough, you know, you have to dig pretty deep to find out who is running, you know, or why are you doing this? Well, I mean, this is crazy. Here I am running 100 miles. Why am I out here? You know, the big questions come up. Why am I doing this? Who am I? And when you run that far, all of your defenses get so worn down that you are just totally raw. I mean, it is, talk about instant, like kind of opening. You either open or you like go nuts. And so it was a real, I liked it because it was in my body, because I was very grounded. And the beautiful thing about doing anything in your body is that you can't be in any other time zone. I mean, in your body, that's just being present. You can't, your body doesn't live in the future, certainly doesn't live in the past. And so it really forces you to be right in the moment. The more in the moment you are, the better things go. Whether you're like me, if you're running 50 miles or 100 miles or at work in a challenging situation. So one of the things I learned from being in my body was how to, was two things that I ended up incorporating into the books that my wife and I wrote about running and walking. And two of the biggest steps, the biggest turning points for me was realizing the connection between alignment and relaxation. Okay, so this alignment and relaxation is a principle that comes out of Tai Chi, which I, you know, in my, I suppose it was in my early 40s when I first started taking Tai Chi. And that principle runs through everything in the movement principles of Tai Chi. So you have to have your body aligned, but in order to be powerful, it has to be relaxed, because if you hold any tension, it stops you from moving as freely as you could. Take that on another level, beyond the physical level, take it on the emotional level or the psychic level or whatever. You know, anybody who's not aligned, that's what intention is about, being aligned. Okay, so you can be aligned with your intention, but relaxed in your conduct, or relaxed in your expectations, or relaxed in your judgments about yourself, or, you know, however you use those principles are like yin and yang. You know, yin is the alignment, yang is the relaxation, you know, but they have to be together. Yin and yang always have to join and work with each other as a team. They're not opposites. So this was this whole thing I discovered out of just studying Tai Chi that I then worked on applying back into my running practice
Mm.
as a spiritual practice still. And it completely changed how I was moving and moving my body and how I was experiencing myself as I ran. And that's a big deal because if you talk to most people who run ultra marathons, that's any distance longer than a marathon. Anything as an ultra marathon is anything over 26 miles. Okay. So people that run that far, you got to have a little bit of grit or a lot of stupidity, you know. And I didn't want to go the stupid way. So I decided to do it as a very intentional practice, you know. Teach the whole way through, bringing in what I knew from Tai Chi into my running, how to apply it to every aspect of how I moved my body, because it's so important in Tai Chi how you move every part of your body. There's no part that just has a ride.
Mm.
Okay. Every part has to be involved, even the smallest tiny little finger, you know, all the little parts, all the big parts. And when I realized that as I was practicing Tai Chi, I was really learning how to acknowledge and recognize a center inside of myself, but then also then how to be in that center and be moving through the world, or be in that center and sing, or be in that center and play the guitar, or be in that center and ride a bike, be in that center and whatever, give a hug. That it was a really different experience of life coming from that place, always starting from that place and then moving out from there. So in Tai Chi, if you want to throw a punch, you move your center, and that moves the rest of your body, that moves your arm, that moves your hand. So then if you want to throw a punch, you don't do it like that. You move your whole center, and that creates the momentum of your body to deliver the intention of your mind. Okay. If I studied it enough years that I realized that, as with anything, pretty much comes out of Taoism or China, you can take it on every single level, spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and apply all of those same rules. So what I did in Tai Chi was I deciphered Tai Chi into those principles like alignment and relaxation, gradual progress. There's another principle out of Tai Chi where you don't just jump ahead. Gradual progress is really the way to go, you know. And so there's all kinds of these little principles. So I would make note of them, you know, and then I would always apply them back to my running, because then my running would inform my body, would inform my being, you know, it would inform me how to move. But then I would say, okay, if it's not physical, then how would I use this same principle emotionally? Or how would I use it if I'm in a crowd talking to a group of people? And all of those principles absolutely transfer straight across. So that's what led me to start develop with my wife our whole program. It's called ChiRunning and Chi Walking. So it's all how to run or how to walk using the principles of Tai Chi, but that's just the physical level. And so you can use the body and the body practices from walking or running to learn the principles so that you really get a feel. I'm going back to that felt sense of what it feels like. So yes, I could tell you how to be aligned and relaxed, but until you really feel yourself dead on aligned with your intent, but at the same time really being aware of just how relaxed you really need to be in order to accomplish anything, then until you feel that then it's just a bunch of words, you know, doesn't really work, you know.
That's kind of sounds like it's in alignment with that experience of seeing the moon, you know, intellectualizing
Yeah.
the vastness. You know, you can say that all day long, the vastness or the connectedness, and we use these words, but you know, until that wisdom or that perspective penetrates your being to that degree, and you feel that, and you take it into your spiritual intuition center. It's hard, and it's a subtle shift, but it's the shift that needs to happen to really embody that lesson or that wisdom or the teaching of something.
Exactly. And the key word you used is embodiment,
Mm.
because that's, no matter how, like I said, I went to all these other spiritual groups, and it all felt a little airy to me, ungrounded, and until you take that information and really embody it, it's not as much good to you. It's not as effective
Mm.
in your life, in dealing with things, or in practical world. So ends up being this really amazing way to bring spirituality into the mundane.
Mm.
And that's really where it happens, everyday life. Yeah, I always thought, well, maybe God, when I first heard about all these guys from India, I thought, well, am I going to have to go to India and live in a cave for like 5 years and do that whole trip? And I go, nah, man, I'm not that into caves. and and then realize that you don't need to go anywhere. That's the whole thing. But I think that embodiment thing, that felt sense, is what has drawn me all along, because I didn't like the cerebral sense. There's not a feeling to it, and but whenever I could do something and actually feel pretty good felt sense of what it feels like, and nowadays, I've been going up to the retreat at Don's retreat in Tennessee, and hearing him talk a lot and hearing Alea talk a lot has really brought it into really brought it even deeper into my everyday experience, because everybody that I know that has woken up to some level, they all talk about whatever it is. It's almost all based in stillness. That's what most spiritual people seeking. I don't know if they're really seeking God or whatever. I think they're just seeking stillness, because that's just away from the mind that just keeps spinning and keeps creating and keeps doing and keeps imagining and keeps doing all that. Stillness isn't that. It's really pulling yourself out of that whole path the ego would love to take and the mind lives in. And it's a great alternative underpinning, rather than being swept off by everything. There's this thing that always is like kind of, it's this like steadiness underneath it all, that it's that steadiness like that they teach in Tai Chi. A really good teacher will teach in Tai Chi how you can be completely still, and the quieter you are, the quicker you can respond to anything that goes, the quicker and more accurately you can respond to anything that gets thrown at you. And so when I came up with this way to teach people about all of this through running, it was all about one of the themes is body sensing. How do you feel in your body what's going on? Because most people are less connected with their body than they should be, And so if you can learn to sense in your body, then you've got this incredible tool to experience the world. Because your body has 5 senses. That is your connection with this world, the physical world. If you didn't have 5 senses working, you'd either be in a coma or you'd be dead, right? You wouldn't be experiencing a whole lot. So if you can really use body sensing in everything that you do, and that's what I've been teaching for 20 years, is how do you feel your body, what's going on? So when I'm talking to somebody who's a walker or somebody who's a runner, I just have them walk, and I go, so what do you feel when you walk? Physically, just what is your body telling you? Oh, well, my heels are touching the ground, the wind's blowing across my face, my arms are swinging, there's tension in my shoulder, there's, I just get people to completely get pretty into sensing every part of their body and how it works. And then what I try to teach them to do is how to release tension while they're moving. That's a big key for a lot of people. How to breathe, which is really combined with releasing tension, how to breathe better. And then how to move in a way that doesn't hurt your body. And I know that sounds like, why would anybody want to move in a way that hurts their body? Well, guess what? 95% of everybody who moves in a way that eventually is going to hurt their body. And so then what happens is I teach people how to move. I give them little exercises or what to do with their legs or their hands or their brain or their eyes or their spine. And they start, and it's important that you watch. So you take a focus. Let's say I'm showing you how to swing your arms. So I'd say, okay, now bend your arms, let them swing in a really relaxed way where you're not forcing them and your shoulders aren't tense or whatever. So that alone is like a mantra. They have to watch that as often as possible. They're just watching, just observing. What's my body saying? Okay, do I have any aches or pains? If I do, where are they? So there's this whole conversation that starts between your mind and your body. Well, for decades, people have been talking about mind-body work, but I'm not sure how many people really understand it is really mind and body as almost two different entities, and they work as partners, and it's not mind over body. It's not, it's not mind control, and it's not body control either. And, but mind-body work is really truly using your body as an instrument of spiritual practice. Because if you watch your body enough, you learn how to be a pretty darn good observer. Mm. And if you take out the judgmental side of it, while you're just watching, just get as objective as you can. Oh, I'm feeling a pain in my right inner scapula, right? You don't take that personally or anything. You just describe it. This is what I'm seeing. This is what's going on. But I've coached many runners who are long distance runners that if they come to a hill, they will take it personally. Like, oh my God, I can't believe this hill came up right now. And that's their mind working, right? And you drop them down into their center, into their moving center, and then they can start observing, oh, okay, so there's a hill here. What do I do to respond to that hill? What would be my best response to this hill? So then I teach them physical responses. Shorten your stride, lean into the hill. There's all kinds of things you can do to make that hill easier, to alter that hill from being a hill. Right. Right. You don't have to run up a hill. You just have to run differently as you go over that piece of terrain. Right. Okay. And so just making that decision to watch yourself, making that decision to change how you move through a challenge, all of that stuff can be learned through something as simple as walking. And it is, so for some people, it's pretty revolutionary. They go, oh my God, I had no idea, what this held. I used to just walk. Now I got to pay attention, and it's like totally changed how I live. How they watch everything, how they listen to things, how they respond to things. And so that whole thing it's been interesting. So when you talk about turning points, this whole thing that I've been working at for 20 years, developing this whole system of teaching people how to move, for me is an ongoing turning point. So I have not found the end of learning about this stuff or practicing it or trying new stuff. I learned something new. Day before yesterday, I went on a long run and I learned something completely new that really worked. And it's just because I leave myself open to experimenting, just watching and feeling. Watching and feeling. And I think it's a good practice, you know, because now when I learn something, the next time I go out, I can apply that. And, and I'm not just going about how I do things in a rote way,
Mm.
you know, I'm constantly trying to see if there's something subtler I can get from it, something more I can do, something I'm missing, you know. And so, and good place to do it is when you're walking or running, because if you feel tired, there's something you're not doing right.
Mm.
It's not that you're exhausted, not that you're working too hard or whatever. That's just some way you could change how you're doing to make that go away, you know.
Well, that's I mean that's mindfulness practice, right? That is the basis, is have bringing awareness into everything you're doing, and
Yeah.
taking that into, and it sounds like you've used that in a physical way and use that to, and you talked about grounding, and I'm curious more about what curated that sense of grounding. What made you feel like grounding and being physically present was such a valuable thing instead of being in that more cerebral state? You can.
Oh, yeah. Um, I felt really ineffectual in that cerebral state. Wow, all these people around me have big old wake ups and I'm not doing anything. So that's not working for me. Let me try something else that I can actually feel, you know? And so the grounded sense, and I learned how to do a really good grounding stance when I first started learning Tai Chi, because I went to this class in Boulder, and this guy had just moved from China, so he was like the real deal. So he was he was a master, but he was young for a master. He was like in his early 30s, and so he had an ongoing class. And so a friend of mine turned me on to this class. So he said, just go to the class. You can pick up anywhere. He'll just take you in. And so I went there, and this guy, uh, I met the teacher, and he had a class of about 30 people, all doing various levels of Tai Chi. And so I walked in, had them take off and go do something. So he came over to me and he says, okay, we're going to start by working on how you stand. So that involves posture and being grounded. So he told me, he moved me into the position that was really good posture. And he says, okay, now I want you just to, I'm going to give you some tips to just hold that. And I want you just to work with that. Just stay as aligned as you can. But above all, I want you to feel the ground underneath you, pushing up on the bottoms of your feet. And so I was doing this. And so the class was 2 hours long. And so I stood there for 2 hours. Every 20 minutes, he'd be teaching the class. He'd go away and teach the class. And he'd come back 20 minutes later and he'd make a little adjustment. He'd go, look good, I'll see you later. And he'd go for 20 more minutes and I'd just stand there. The class was twice a week for 2 hours. For 3 weeks straight, he had me just stand. And he said, this is the hardest thing I have to teach in Tai Chi to any student, is how to stand, to get somebody to get it right, how to stand. So that alone told me this is a big deal. Just the little subtle things can be a really big deal. So how you stand is a big deal. So when I got to the point where I felt like I could just stand, then there was all of a sudden that's when you ask about grounded, then I felt like the earth was just supporting me. I didn't have to do anything. I just kept my skeleton aligned with the pull of gravity. The earth did the rest. Just totally supported my body. The more I sunk into my body, the more that force came right back up from the earth, because the earth wasn't going to sink further. It somehow returns, goes back. And so once I felt that going on, I thought, oh, right, that's what he's talking about. And so that was this whole, like I said, it's a string of turning points that is like every time I run into one, all of a sudden that opens up a whole new direction or a whole new avenue of interest or an avenue of learning. And so, through the 20 years I spent teaching ChiRunning, I always learned way more than the students. I felt kind of guilty, you know. Oh my God, this is like totally great. I'm learning so much by teaching this thing to people.
Well,
And
that
yeah.
well, I was just gonna say, to add to that, I had been doing yoga with Corinne for I don't know 8 to 10 years, and then I took the yoga teacher training, and,
Uh-huh.
which was interesting because I kind of came into it feeling like I was the youngest, least experienced person because I was with 6 or 7 other, I guess, middle-aged women who had been, taking yoga teacher training. We're yoga teachers, so I'm like, oh, I'm going to be way behind the curve. I end up getting into her, yoga teacher training, and now it's from the perspective of a teacher of what to look for, how to align, et cetera, et cetera. And my whole relationship with that practice changed simply by looking at it from a different point of view. So I can totally relate with that sense of when you try to teach the thing you think you know, it's going to teach you, just as much back as because you really have to embody that whole, the whole concept, and then be able to articulate that or explain that to the next person. So,
I
yeah,
think
Yeah.
that's what, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and yet Sean ended up being the star student. Like he was all intimidated because all these other ladies were already yoga teachers for 20 years. But
Uh,
because he'd been studying this style, which everybody wanted to learn, this awareness yoga, he already was embodying it because he'd been hanging out with me for 10 years.
yeah,
He
yeah,
already literally embodied it and could feel it in his body much more readily than they could. And
yeah.
so he ended up being, everybody was looking to him like, Sean, what do you think of this? And it was just so beautiful to see.
that was a massive, turning point experience, in my life, and so I relate to what you're talking about. These moments where you get to this one thing, if you're following intuition and you get to this next thing, and okay, follow this teacher now, and it brings you to this next place. And when you let go of the judgment mind, the expectations, and you free flow through these experiences and be available for the next one. Had I not been ready, and had I not been open and pliable for that teacher training, I would not have gathered nearly as much from it, and that would not have set me on a different trajectory that ultimately brought me to a much, I'd say, greater space and perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And the beauty of teaching, I think, is that it gives you the opportunity to try on different bodies
Mm,
because you're teaching somebody and you got to really absorb what their struggles are.
yeah,
You got to go, oh, wow. So, and then you have to embody that so you can feel it. So then you can turn around and go, okay, I know exactly what you need to do. Here's how you work through this one. And because you're working through their body. And I think that's the sign of a good teacher is somebody who can actually get inside the student and teach from inside out rather than I know all this stuff, I'm teaching you, you should be thankful kind of thing. No, it's not that at all. It's like you are at service to those people. You're at service to that entity as really trying to get more expanded or looser or aligned or whatever they're doing. And yeah, you just gain from it. You,
absolutely.
yeah, it's a really cool, interesting thing that I never thought about teaching. But I did know that I realized along the way what I didn't like about teachers, why some teachers are ineffective, or I just don't learn anything from them, is because they didn't really. It's almost like they didn't care if you learned or not. They were more concerned with how much they knew,
Mm,
and that's a teacher's not going to go very far. That's identified with what they know. uh, you know and so you just got to take a beginner's mind no matter how far along you are as a teacher or as a student or whatever. I mean, you're always a student. If you're not always a student, you'll never be a good teacher. you
yeah.
know
Well, and it's I think some of the things that I felt is a teacher who identifies as just the teacher, as the one with the thing you need, and almost like I don't want to say takes advantage of that, but but there's a moment where you have to let go of what you know because you're going to be faced with the circumstance where oh, this is a new experience for me as even as a teacher, and I have to let go of my preconceived notions of what
Yeah,
I'm looking at, and I have to get ultimately you have to be able to translate what that person is experiencing as the student, and you
exactly.
have to be able to translate what you're talking about physically or emotionally or mentally, spiritually, psychologically, whatever it is. You have to let go of your ideas and constructs to be able to find the lostness that exists in that person,
Exactly.
and sit with that lostness for a while. We've been talking a lot about Rupert Spira now that I
Yeah.
can't, and he talks about the practical teaching of going into the wilderness where that person is lost in whatever they're struggling with,
Hmm.
and by listening to them, listen them out of the wilderness of their experience, and be with that person, and ultimately you're not teaching really at all. You're just you're in that same state that they need you to be in. You're reflecting their experience back at them so they can learn their way out of it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
take
You're not adding your stuff onto them.
right.
You're getting them to just open their own doors.
Yeah.
And the more perceptive you are with your student, the more doors you see
Mm,
that you can turn them on to,
mm,
without them knowing you're opening a door, you know. Oh, let's try this. This looks cool. I mean, uh, and all of a sudden, because one thing I would also say about the best teachers I've met were ones that allowed you to discover the
mm,
knowledge. You weren't teaching knowledge to them. You want to allow people to discover it, because then, like I said, it comes from inside.
mm.
Oh, I get it. That's that aha moment. And so I'm just teaching a big string of discoveries to people, and that comes from that thing about like reading people. It's so funny because at this point, I can watch somebody walk down the road or run down the road, and I could pretty much tell you what's going on in their life, just by how they move their body or
Mm.
how they don't move their body, or where they hold their tension, or what quirks they have about how they hold their hands or land with their feet, or how aggressive they move, or how weak, or how their structure is. And it's fascinating, you
Yeah.
know.
It
I'm not
is the
making
body.
judge.
The body reflects where you're at in your life. The body reflects the mind, and they
Exactly.
hold tensions where the mind hold tensions. Yeah, it's so fascinating. When I first started to realize that years ago in yoga, I was like, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's like Carolyn Mace, your biography becomes your biology.
Yeah.
That was a very good phrase. That was another good one of those turning point phrases where you just go, "Oh, that makes so much sense." You know?
I love that you're using the word turning points, Danny. I thank you for playing along
Oh
with
yeah.
our theme. I really, some people call it, there's so many different names we've had from different people. We had one girl that said following the bouncing ball of her life. That was one of my favorite ones too. We all have these, this language that we use. Okay, so I love all this conversation. Thank you for sharing it's great, great uh, wisdom for everybody with the body, and so thanks for sharing that. But I do have a personal question, just because um, this is something that interests me, is that if you have any stories or wisdom about the 17 years that you lived in community,
Uh-huh.
like how was that?
It was like anything, a mix, you
Yeah.
know. It was a community based in what's called the Fourth Way, which is, I think Gurdjieff was the one that really started this whole movement. He was a Russian mystic, died about 1949. And he took the Russian approach to spirituality.
Okay.
Oh, man. As they say in the South, God bless him. Uh, and uh, but everything had to be done really intensely,
Mm,
like really intensely. And so if you have an intention, you have to have your intentions written all over your wall. You have to know what you're going to be doing from the minute you wake up till the next minute, the next minute. And everything was so, there was a part to it that was, living an intentional life, but they were talking like minute to minute. And it was, sometimes it was really good. Sometimes it was just too much. It was like way too much, it left the heart out. And eventually that's what I moved on with. But one thing I did learn was all of this whole kind of, some of it was also based on the organ energy systems, because this guy, he was a brilliant guy, the teacher there, and he had studied the organ energy systems. And what I mean by that is, if you follow John Thiel, I think, who came up with muscle test, he does muscle testing and all of that stuff. And this guy was way into showing you how the organs of your body obviously share meridians with the same. So there's a meridian, a muscle, and an organ for every part of your body. Every one of your organs has a corresponding muscle, has a corresponding meridian. Okay, so he took that knowledge and started working on it on the emotional level. And he came up with definitions for, like, what are the main aspects of each of the organs and what's the energy of that organ. There's a brief example, say the stomach. The stomach is an organ. It's an organ of the first thing that comes. It takes something rough from the world, food, takes it into your body. So that's something from the external entering your body. It transforms that food into nutrients. Okay. And so your stomach plays a pretty big role in the act of intake, right? And expression. And so when he takes it to the emotional level, it's like, if your stomach system is subpar, you will have a hard time, you will have issues around taking in or putting out, okay? Whether that's speaking or emoting or anything like that. And a lot of that, and that could all be backed up by muscle testing. Whether you're weak in a certain muscle, you can watch out for being weak emotionally on that level with that certain system, okay? Beautiful system that was brilliant. And I really like it, and I still use it. And he was into this whole touch for health thing, and that was the book that I was trying to refer to, the muscle testing. But he was into touch for health, and so he backed up everything that he was saying by actual muscle tests, by saying, oh, the body says this is strong, so that's good. And so anyway, that part I got, that was really good. But the rigidity around everything else was like not my cup of tea. But it's interesting being in a community for that long. The people that I was in there with at various times, people who come in and out and stuff like that, they got to be closer than my real family. It was great. I still have very close friends that I'm in contact from back then. And I left that community in 1997. So that's a lot of years, and I'm still on really, good terms with them. It just didn't work for me.
Well, 17 years in a community setup, that's actually pretty successful. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to demean it by calling it a commune, but I'm assuming it's kind of a commune setup. You share.
It was a type of collective. It wasn't. We didn't all live in the same place, but
Gotcha.
But we shared certain things. We
Gotcha.
had our own co-op, so we could buy food at bulk rate. We had a daycare in one of the houses that people, if they were working during the day, their kids could hang out there. And
Cool.
And they set up a really nice alternative living in the midst of a regular community. And yeah.
That's 17 years. That's a pretty. You must have had a relatively healthy, experience in that, because otherwise it just would have fallen apart. I've heard of a couple, where it's almost like spiritual guinea pig kind of a setup where it's like, well,
Yeah.
test these spiritual practices in a community like this, and it tends to go sideways because I think of, well, I think we've talked about this where there's there's practices or spiritual concepts that are great in theory or practice, but until you, and kind of what we've been talking about and what you seem to hold as a core value is, if you don't ground that in your real life experience, in the real world, in the everyday aspect of things, it it's not going to necessarily work as it seems like in the mind as a conception, and
Right.
it's great that we have these experiences and we test these spiritual concepts, um, because you wouldn't know otherwise. But it is funny how intellectualized spirituality can be, and how of the mind spirituality can be. Uh,
Totally.
and mindfulness, it gets tricky because you are in somewhat of a you're in the mind, and the mind and the brain get conflated in a lot of times. So these things are in that thinking realm to a certain degree, and it gets mixed up, and you can get really lost in that, the ideas and the thoughts of things.
It's hard to pull out of it. For some people, it's impossible to pull out of it.
Yeah.
But what happened for me was that I learned an incredible amount when I was in that, from this teacher and from other people. And I learned really a lot about spiritual practice and life in general and everything. And I was learning so much for a long time. And then at some point I realized, you know what, for now, I'm kind of done with learning, absorbing more information. I want to go out and try my wheels, and I didn't want to be stuck in this community where I was limited to how I could live and everything else, because it would go against, the whole rigid setup. Even as well as the setup worked, it wasn't working for me because I still needed to flow. I still needed to take off the training wheels and see, well, what do I know, and then so I left that community that was in Boulder, and my wife and I, that's when I got married. My wife and I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. She got a job out there, and so I sold my business. I got rid of my business. I had built custom furniture for that same 17 years. That's what I did in the background, and so I got rid of all of that, and I didn't want to keep doing that when I got to San Francisco. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. And but I did know that I was really fascinated about this combination. That was when I was first discovering the relationship between Tai Chi and running. And so my wife said, okay, well, I'm making enough money with this new job. You can take 3 months to figure out what you want to do with your life. That was the biggest gift she ever gave me. And so I was able to just, what's
Sorry,
that?
I didn't mean to cut you off, but did you stick to the 3 months or did you go over?
I didn't go over.
Oh, I did. I went way over, so I'm glad you stuck to 3 months.
Whatever. I didn't dare go over, uh, and but along the way was when I started um, developing this whole system of running, and then I there was a local group that was a fundraising group, Team in Training, and they raised money for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society of the United States. That was in San Francisco, a huge group. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll teach this stuff. I want to practice teaching this stuff. And so I would go and volunteer to give a presentation on running form to their marathon training program. And so I did, and I would collect emails. I would take a clipboard with me. And that was back when people would actually give you their email address, and I ended up, in about 3 years, I got about 10,000 people on a mailing list. And that's when I started doing, and my wife said, so she's the business person behind everything. She's a visionary. She knows what to do, how to do it, how to get it done. And she saw something in what I was pulling together. And she said, there's a book in this. And if we write a book, and she wrote it with me, she was the organizer and also had a lot of the same knowledge that I'd been going through. And so she helped me put the information out of my brain onto page, because I had no trust that I could write. I'd never written. And so that started this whole team, my wife and I working together to develop this whole thing. But I was, so I started with a newsletter, and I started classes, teaching classes. Interestingly enough, ChiRunning started in the Silicon Valley, because everything takes root there. It's a really wide open place for new ideas. And so that's where we started. And then it just grew from there. It got a momentum of its own. And we sold our business last year to a group of our master instructors, but it was way beyond my control or power. After a while, went worldwide, and there's so many people and everything involved that it was out of my hands, quite literally just beyond me. And I'm still very close with the people that are instructors that bought the business, because they're doing a really good job of carrying it on. And that made me feel good, because they really understood the energy I wanted to try to get across in teaching a very different approach to movement. And so they got that. And so they're carrying it on now. But that was 20 years of doing that. And my wife did all the business end, and I was out in the world being that whole end. And so it was a good combination, except my wife didn't really want to be in that business end, but she had the idea to do this stuff, and then kind of couldn't get out of it once she started this ball rolling. And so anyway, it was quite a story just in that, just evolving that whole thing. And she said, if you teach and if we write a book, then by the time that book is published, we need to have an instructor training program on the ground. Because if you publish this book, and it's a lot of information, without some kind of system of coherence, of people not just wanting to take it and go teach it on their own, then you're going to have to establish a whole branding thing. And that's what she helped develop. And she's brilliant, totally brilliant at it, really good. So now I'm retired, and she's retired until she decides what she wants to do next. And it's my turn to support her, to go for it, do whatever you need. It's been nice.
Nice. And how long have you guys been in Asheville?
15 years.
Wow.
15 years, probably this month. Yeah, we've been there a while, so we love it here. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be living anywhere else in my life, so
That's
too
great.
late to start somewhere different.
Yeah, well, when you've landed in a place that you're going to be at for a while, I think your being just knows. And Asheville certainly is a special place.
Oh yeah.
First time we drove into Asheville, or flew to Asheville from San Rafael, we flew out here 3 different times, because somebody suggested, why don't you go to Asheville? And we didn't know anybody here. We didn't know anything. So we wanted to try it out. We'd heard some good stuff about it. And so we flew out 3 different times, 3 different seasons, because it's in the South. And I grew up out West, and living in the South was like, are you kidding me? I saw Easy Rider, and, what's the one about Paddle Faster? I hear banjo music.
Deliverance.
Deliverance. Yeah, I said, man, I saw those movies, and they're, what are they, filmed in Asheville, and so I was very leery about living in the South, and I'd never even been here, but grows on you. I really like it now.
Well, and in Asheville, it's funny because you lived in Boulder and you've lived in San Francisco, and Asheville is got a lot of similarities with both of those cities.
Yes, exactly.
On the East Coast, and the South it's a weird little thing. It's kind of like the Austin of the Southeast.
Yeah, it is.
So.
Yeah, it's the Tucson of the Southeast, or the what's it called? Sedona.
Yeah.
It's like the Sedona. Yeah, and it is like that. And so the 3 main places I've lived in my life were in the mountains in a hip little town.
Yeah.
I can't complain. Yeah.
I'm a mountain girl too. I'm a BC, British Columbia girl, so I love.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the mountains. Well, we'll have to get your lovely wife on here now next, and it's such a great conversation, Danny. Thank you for sharing your
Oh,
life,
you're
your
certainly welcome.
wisdom.
I was happy. I'm happy you invited me. I'm thrilled. I'm looking forward to it.
No, it was great, man. It was great to meet you, and hopefully we'll see you at the Wellbeing Center sooner than later because we're heading out there in a few weeks. And
Oh, you are? We'll be there in 2 weeks, I think. So we're going to some event Don's having, so we'll be there pretty soon.
Probably the weekend before we're there. My retreat's the June 17th to 20th.
Yeah, I think we're there just before then.
Before, that's what I thought.
We'll
yeah.
cross paths though. So yeah, I'd love to
Yes.
meet you, Sean. That'd be great.
absolutely. Well, thank you. It was a great angle. I liked your approach. It's something we haven't talked about. Embodying that more, a spiritual practice and physical presence. That's a new thing for this podcast. So thank you for sharing, man. It was
Good. Yeah. Always glad to shake things up.
Hell yeah. Who isn't, man?
Yeah, really.
All right, till we meet again.
All right, take care.